No, I'm going to Canada, but if you know.
Good morning, Excellencies, dear colleagues. I declare the 11th Emergency Special Session of the General Assembly resumed and call to order its 23rd plenary meeting. Members will recall that in its resolution S11/9 of 3 December 2025, the Assembly decided to adjourn the 11th Emergency Special Session of the General Assembly temporarily and to authorize the President of the General Assembly to resume its meeting upon request from member states. In this regard, I should like to draw the attention of the delegations to document A/ES11/164, which contains a letter dated 18 February 2026 from the representatives of Latvia and Ukraine to the United Nations, addressed to the President of the General Assembly, requesting the resumption of the 11th emergency special session. I intend to conduct the proceedings of these meetings in accordance with the rules of procedure of the Assembly and the past practices of its emergency special sessions. In keeping with established practice, I should now like to invite the attention of the Assembly to document A/ES11/165 concerning member states that are in arrears in payment of their financial contributions to the United Nations within the terms of Article 19 of the Charter. May I take it that the Assembly duly takes note of the information contained in this document? It is so decided. The Assembly will now resume its consideration of Agenda Item 5, entitled Letter dated 28 February 2014 from the Permanent Representative of Ukraine to the United Nations, addressed to the President of the Security Council, S/2014/136. The document under this item is announced in the Journal of the United Nations. I will now make a statement on behalf of the President of the General Assembly. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, 4 years have passed since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine by the Russian Federation, and nearly 12 years have elapsed since the illegal annexation of the Autonomous Republic of Crimea and the city of Sevastopol. This war, initiated by a permanent member of the Security Council in blatant violation of our Charter, continues to inflict untold suffering on the Ukrainian people. And even as peace negotiations have been ongoing for some time now, the year 2025 stood as the deadliest for civilians since the start of this invasion. Since the beginning, thousands of Ukrainian civilians, including children, have been killed or injured. War-related humanitarian needs have only intensified, as the impact of relentless attacks and displacement is felt across the entire length and breadth of Ukraine. Nearly 4 million people remain internally displaced, while 5.7 million more live as refugees globally. Nearly 1/3 of the population has been forced to flee, including more than half of all Ukrainian children. This violence spares no one, not mothers or fathers, not grandparents, and certainly not children. Meanwhile, the systematic destruction of infrastructure has turned once vibrant cities into hellscapes. Homes, healthcare facilities, schools, and especially power plants and energy grids have been deliberately targeted and destroyed, leaving people to freeze to death in winters that plunge to minus 20 degrees Celsius. This constitutes a clear violation of international humanitarian law. In the meantime, the people continue to suffer, mourning the lives, livelihoods, and homes that they have lost. We cannot allow the violation of international law to become the norm, and we must safeguard the founding principles of our Charter. And this Assembly can lead the way. When 4 years ago, the world watched in shock as an estimated 100,000 soldiers amassed on the borders of Ukraine, it would have been easy to remain paralyzed by that shock. But the membership chose a different path. Few could have imagined that the General Assembly, too often dismissed as a body with no real power, would unite so swiftly over a single weekend. Following the deadlock in the Security Council, the Assembly convened the first meeting of the 11th Emergency Special Session on 28 February 2022. The membership came together, and it was necessary that it did. The world came together to show that this was not merely about Ukraine or Europe. It was about the international peace order and the very Charter of the United Nations. That was an urgent call then, and it remains an urgent call now, as we resume the 11th Emergency Special Session today. Since the invasion, the General Assembly has remained clear, resolute, and unwavering. It has adopted 8 resolutions, consistently demanding the immediate, complete, and unconditional withdrawal of Russian forces from Ukrainian territory. It has called in these resolutions to uphold the Charter, reaffirming its strong commitment to the sovereignty, independence, unity, and territorial integrity of Ukraine within its internationally recognized borders, extending to its territorial waters. Moreover, it has called for the complete exchange of prisoners of war, the release of all unlawfully detained persons, and the return of all internees and civilians forcibly transferred or deported, including children. 1 year ago, this Assembly adopted Resolution ES 11/7. That document highlighted its collective concern that the invasion continues to have devastating and long-standing consequences, not only for Ukraine, but also for other regions and for the global stability. At the time when the United Nations is under intense scrutiny and the Security Council remains deadlocked, this Assembly has demonstrated its ability to act as the moral voice of the international community. I welcome all diplomatic efforts that aim to achieve an immediate, full, and unconditional ceasefire, to end the war, and to promote a process towards lasting peace through negotiations. Any peace agreement must be firmly grounded in the UN Charter, international law, and General Assembly resolutions. As we have learned from history, this is the only way to a comprehensive, just, and lasting peace. Today, colleagues, the world is watching. While our focus is on Ukraine, the stakes extend far beyond one country or one region. Once again, the international peace order is under strain. Once again, the Charter is being tested. The Charter does not apply selectively. If it can be violated in one place, its authority weakens everywhere, and its promises lose meaning. This concerns Ukraine, but also Myanmar, Venezuela, Gaza, and Sudan. It concerns peace everywhere. It concerns us all. And therefore, we need to stand up and uphold the principles of our Charter, every day, everywhere, for everyone. With this, I end the statement by Her Excellency the President of the General Assembly. As stated in the letter from President dated 18 February 2026, and as practiced in the 80th session, and as an outcome of the reform debates, the President proposed to apply speaking time limits of 5 minutes for delegations speaking in their national capacity and 7 minutes for statements made on behalf of a group of states on a trial basis. Delegations are strongly encouraged to comply with the proposed speaking limits also in today's meeting of the 11th Emergency Special Session. To assist delegations in managing their time, a countdown clock will be displayed on the screens. I thank you for your cooperation. I now give the floor to Her Excellency Mariana Betsa, Deputy Minister for Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, to introduce draft resolution A/ES11/L17.
Thank you, Madam President. Your Excellencies, distinguished delegates, it's a great honor for me to speak here today in this hall. Today, this assembly meets at a moment of profound historic significance for Ukraine. We're entering the 5th year of Russia's full-scale invasion against my country. We're entering the 13th year of Russia's unprovoked, unjustified aggression against my country, which already resulted in temporary occupation of the Autonomous Republic of Crimea and the city of Sevastopol and parts of Donetsk and Lugansk regions of Ukraine. No country in modern history has endured an attack of such gravity, scale, magnitude, and duration. Russia's war of aggression has shattered peace in Europe and around the globe and struck at the very core of the UN Charter and the fundamental principles of international law: sovereignty, territorial integrity, and non-use of force. Russia's war of aggression is imperial and neo-colonial in its nature. What Russia wants to do, what Kremlin wants to do, is to divide the world into spheres of influence and to make Ukraine as a satellite. Russia will not succeed. Russia miscalculated gravely in 2014 when it started its aggression against Ukraine, thinking that Ukraine would collapse. Russia miscalculated gravely in 2022 when it started its full-scale invasion, thinking that Ukraine would collapse. And Russia miscalculates gravely now, in February 2026, thinking that it is betting on time and Ukraine would collapse. Ukraine resists and defends itself, and we're not alone. I'm grateful to each and every member state present in this hall for your outstanding support. However, despite peace efforts led by the US and supported by Europe, Russia continues to demonstrate no genuine willingness to stop this aggression. Just throughout 1 week, from 8th to 15th February 2026, Russia launched about 1,300 attack drones, more than 1,200 guided aerial bombs, and 50 missiles against Ukraine, most of them ballistic. On the contrary, Ukraine has shown clear and good faith readiness to pursue peace, including through compromises which are extremely difficult for us, such as accepting the cessation of hostilities along the line of contact. Yet, the Kremlin's position remains unchanged. Kremlin wants Ukraine to get back from our own sovereign territory, so Russia may occupy it. This is not a negotiating red lines. The sovereignty and territorial integrity of every member state is a fundamental principle of the UN Charter and international law, and I'm more than sure that it is a red line, not only for Ukraine, but for each country present here in this hall. These 4 years have come at an immense and tragic cost for Ukraine and for Ukrainian people. Unable to achieve strategic goals on the front, Russia pursued large-scale attacks against civilians, children, residential buildings, bombing schools, kindergarten, and critical infrastructure. Ukrainian cities, Kyiv, Kharkiv, Odessa, Dnipro, Zaporizhia, and many others are subjected to daily large-scale missile and drone attacks. Entire cities, Mariupol, Bakhmut, Avdiivka, and many others are erased from the map. Energy infrastructure has been deliberately and repeatedly targeted, especially when we have very severe winter in Ukraine. Russia has turned winter into its weapon, striking power plants and energy networks with the explicit aim of leaving civilians without electricity, heating, and water in freezing temperatures. Yesterday, New York City declared a state of emergency due to severe winter conditions. Now imagine these snowstorms and extreme cold, -20, -26, compounded by deliberate attack on power station and transmission grid. Imagine your apartments, no heating, no electricity, no water, and it's -20 outside, and Russia continues to strike Ukrainian people. That's how residents of Kyiv and many other cities across Ukraine have spent their winter. And this is not a collateral damage. This is not a military strategy gone wrong. This is a deliberate Russian state policy, weaponization of winter, darkness, and cold to break nation, to break our resilience. We're grateful to each country who provided energy assistance at this very critical juncture to Ukraine. It strengthened our resilience. On the front line, where Ukrainian forces have regained 400 square kilometers across the country, in cities and villages far from the front line, where to the sounds of fuel generators, stores and industries continue to operate, medical and other essential services were delivered, and emergency responders worked tirelessly to eliminate the consequences of Russian attacks. Russia has deliberately targeted its campaign against our people, and in particular our children. Many of them abducted, many deported by Russia in grave breach of international law, and many gone missing. Let me just give one story. Andriy Humenyuk was 17 years old when family found themselves in the sight of Russian occupiers in the village of Novonatalyevka in Ukraine's Kherson region. On 11th June 2022, FSB agents broke into the home and abducted his mother, accusing her of assisting the Ukrainian military. The next day, they abducted his father. Andrey's younger brother, Oleg, were left alone. The FSB then pressured Andrey to cooperate, to inform on pro-Ukrainian neighbors. Threatened at gunpoint and living in constant fear, the boys managed to escape to free Ukraine. But their parents are gone. This is just one example of this human tragedy that is developing in Ukraine against the backdrop of Russian aggression. And this is not merely a war against a state, it's a war against people. It's a war against rules. It's a war against law. It's a war against humanity. Madam President, Ukraine did not choose this war. Ukraine chooses peace. Ukraine chooses life. Ukraine chooses independence and freedom. If Ukraine were to stop fighting, we would lose our state, our people, and our freedom. Ukraine seeks peace. We want peace more than anyone, but not peace at any cost, not peace at any price, not peace under the disguise of capitulation or surrender. It will not happen. Ukraine will not surrender. We will never accept the occupation of our territories or our people. We will never accept awarding aggressor for its aggression. And we will never accept impunity for crimes committed against Ukrainians for all these 12 years. Ukraine seeks a dignified, just, comprehensive, and lasting peace. Peace that secures the freedom and independence of our states within internationally recognized borders. Russia continues to reject peace. The Kremlin continues to escalate. It is betting on time, betting that the world will go tired, the unity will weaken, and the principles will be compromised. This assembly must not allow this to happen, because this war is about whether borders can be redrawn by force, whether civilians can be targeted without consequences, and whether the principles we have all pledged to uphold will still mean anything tomorrow. No member state should be left alone when attacked, as Ukraine has been attacked, and Ukraine hasn't been left alone. We're deeply grateful to all member states that have stood with us through military, financial, humanitarian, political support. We're grateful to the US, Europe, African and Arab states, Latin American, Asian, as well as everyone who helps us bring peace closer. Because your investment into peace in Ukraine is an investment into peace and security of your particular country. Excellencies, this moment demands clarity and unity. Ukraine believes that the international community must speak with one voice in support of a full and unconditional ceasefire. At this critical moment, Ukraine presents to this Assembly a draft resolution entitled Support for Lasting Peace in Ukraine. This is not just a resolution of rhetorics. It is a resolution of responsibility. It sets clear steps, support for ongoing peace efforts, a call for full, immediate, and unconditional ceasefire, a call for comprehensive, just, and lasting peace in accordance with the UN Charter and international law. The draft resolution also underscores the urgent need to concrete humanitarian measures, release of all our children, unconditional release of our children, of our civilians, and return of our prisoners of war. These steps are essential confidence-building measures and a moral imperative. This is not just an abstract document. It's about lives, it's about peace, it's about families, it's about justice. A vote in favor of this resolution is not a geopolitical gesture. It is a choice between law and force, between justice and impunity, between peace and continued suffering. Words are not enough. We must act. We ask you to stand with us, not only in solidarity, but in decision. Let this assembly send a clear message in support of the peace process. Aggression will not prevail. Justice will not be denied. Peace will not be abandoned. I therefore urge all member states to vote in favor of draft resolution ES 11/L.17, support for lasting peace in Ukraine. My delegation also moves that the debate on agenda item 5 be suspended at 11 a.m. today in order for the Assembly to proceed to the consideration of draft resolution, on the understanding that the debate would resume immediately after the action on the draft resolution, and the 11th emergency session would only be temporarily adjourned after the conclusion of the debate. Thank you so much.
I thank the Deputy Minister for Foreign Affairs of Ukraine. The representative of Ukraine has moved that the debate on agenda item 5 be suspended at 11 a.m. for the Assembly to proceed to the consideration of draft resolution A/ES11/L17, and that the debate would continue after the action on the draft resolution. This is on the understanding that if the Assembly were to decide to suspend the debate at 11 a.m. to proceed to the consideration of draft resolution A/ES11/L17 and to continue the debate after the action on the draft resolution, and if the Assembly were to subsequently adopt the draft resolution, the 11th emergency special session would be adjourned temporarily following the conclusion of the debate on item 5. Is there any objection to the motion? I hear no objection. It is so decided. Okay. I now have the honor to give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Madam President, today, when a genuine window of opportunity has opened up for a political settlement of the Ukrainian crisis, what we must be talking about first and foremost is not proclamations, but diplomacy. Trilateral negotiations are presently underway between Russia, Ukraine, and the United States. Talks are being held in Abu Dhabi and Geneva. The delegations are working under challenging conditions, fully aware of their historical responsibility for the outcome. This is a moment that calls for quiet, restraint, and respect for the negotiation process. Instead, we are witnessing blatant disregard for the diplomatic efforts of those countries who are investing political capital into the settlement, primarily the United States, as well as the personal efforts of President Donald Trump's administration aimed at finding a compromise. What is particularly cynical is that on February 17th, at the very moment when the delegations of the three countries were headed to Geneva for another round of talks, the armed forces of Ukraine unleashed 151 unmanned aerial vehicles at civilian facilities, primarily in Russia's southern regions. In just 1 week from February 9 to 15th, shelling involving the use of 2,500 munitions injured 147 civilians. 126 people were wounded, including 6 minors, and 21 people were killed. The strikes caused power supply disruptions affecting at least 454,000 people in the Belgorod, Bryansk, Zaporizhia, and Kursk regions. Is such conduct in line with the declared commitment to de-escalation? Does it create the atmosphere of trust needed to advance the talks? If the true goal is really peace, then actions must corroborate words rather than contradict them. If the Kiev regime were truly interested in achieving lasting peace, it would focus its efforts on diplomacy, on seeking mutually acceptable solutions, on working out durable security guarantees for both Russia and Ukraine, rather than initiating yet another politicized vote as part of the resumed 11th emergency special session of the UN General Assembly, which has been reconvened without justification. The very logic behind convening the emergency special session rested on the assumption that the Security Council was unable to fulfill its primary responsibility of maintaining international peace and security. Yet, exactly 1 year ago, the UN Security Council expressed its position on Ukraine by adopting Resolution 2774, reaffirming the need for a peaceful resolution to the conflict. This raises a legitimate question. If the Security Council is fulfilling its role and negotiation efforts are underway, what is the basis for bringing back today's format, and what is its real purpose? It is clear that those who initiated the resumption of the ESS are not interested in a political settlement of the Ukrainian crisis or in sustainable peace. Rather, they're interested in using this political instrument to exert pressure on Russia. However, actions such as this cannot influence the actual outcome of the negotiations, nor can they change the situation on the ground. We have also consistently stated that we cannot consider the resolutions adopted previously as part of this session to be balanced or conducive to a settlement. All of them are one-sided. They contain unrealistic demands, and they only replicate Kiev's political narrative. A year ago, an attempt was made in this very room to effectively legitimize elements of Zelensky's so-called peace formula. In December, an initiative on Ukrainian children was brought forward, one filled with inaccurate data, one that ignored real facts and practical efforts made by both Russia and Ukraine to reunite families. Attempts are being made to artificially replace peace efforts with endless resolutions, with each new non-consensus product being portrayed as the will of the global majority. Distinguished colleagues, today you have been presented with yet another text that essentially continues the same line. The draft resolution is titled Support for Lasting Peace in Ukraine, but its content focuses primarily on the demand for an immediate and complete cessation of hostilities. A ceasefire in itself can be an important element of a settlement, but it is not an end in itself. History knows many examples when a hasty truce that did not address the root causes of the conflict turned into just a pause before a new round of violence. It is clear that Kiev, facing serious difficulties on the front line, as well as dwindling support from its Western sponsors, is primarily interested in a pause so that it can regroup and rearm. Moreover, this resolution, just like all the previous flawed products of the General Assembly on this topic, cites the UN Charter selectively. It highlights the principle of sovereignty and territorial integrity, but only in relation to one country. And where is the mention of another fundamental principle, the right of peoples to self-determination? Where is the reference to the need to respect human rights and fundamental freedoms for all, regardless of race, gender, language, or religion? For 8 years after the unconstitutional coup of 2014 in Ukraine, the civilian population of Donbass was subjected to systematic pressure, restrictions on their language rights, and a military operation that was presented as an anti-terrorist one. And today we see that even those guarantees for Russian-speaking citizens that are enshrined in the Constitution of Ukraine remain mere words on paper. The words comprehensive, just, and lasting peace sound appealing as a statement, but these words must not obscure an attempt to entrench one-sided approaches in UN decisions. Peace cannot be just if it is interpreted solely through the lens of one party's demands while completely ignoring the legitimate concerns of the other. It cannot be comprehensive if it does not address issues of security and the right to use one's native language and practice one's religion freely. And it certainly cannot be lasting if the proposed solutions do not provide for a balance of interests and mutual guarantees. A genuinely sustainable solution is possible only through equal, respectful dialogue without accusations and without imposing pre-made solutions. Particular attention should be paid to the statement in the text regarding continued attacks against the civilian population of Ukraine. Every objective and sensible delegation knows that Russia does not carry out deliberate strikes on civilians. Every human life is important to us, in contrast to the practices employed by Ukrainian troops, which systematically use drones and artillery against civilian targets. Distinguished colleagues, do not let yourselves be fooled. What you have before you is not an instrument of peace. It is an instrument of politicization. No matter what kind of attractive diplomatic packaging it might be wrapped in, its true purpose is to create yet another round of accusations that will then be used as a tool to exert pressure. Meanwhile, Zelensky's regime and its European handlers continue to need numbers that they can later present as evidence of unwavering support. You have a choice. You can support a document that ignores the complexity of the conflict, interprets the norms of the UN Charter in a one-sided manner, and creates obstacles to negotiations. Or you can allow the negotiators to finish the work they have started. The Russian Federation will vote against this General Assembly draft resolution, and as well as any of its standalone paragraphs if they are put to a vote, because this Ukrainian text cannot be fixed up and corrected. We urge every other state to do the same. Every vote against is a vote in favor of searching for sustainable solutions rather than yet another round of political rhetoric. Thank you for your attention.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Russian Federation. I now give the floor to His Excellency Peter Matsinka, Deputy Minister and Foreign Affairs, Deputy Minister for Foreign Affairs and I'm sorry, there was I now give the floor to His Excellency Peter Matsinka, Deputy Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Czech Republic. The floor is yours, Excellency.
Madam President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, for 4 years we've been hearing variations of the same thing here, but I didn't come today to repeat well-known phrases. Much has already been said about Ukraine and its situation after being attacked by Russia 4 years ago. And so, perhaps today allow me to offer a different perspective. Not to talk about the war, but to talk about time. Not to talk about Ukraine, but to talk to Russia. I'm a foreign minister, so I would like to address the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, even though I know he's not personally here today, so perhaps this will reach him. Minister Lavrov, I address you today not primarily as an adversary. I address you as a person who knows very well that no superpower wins a war against reality. You can temporarily control territory. You can temporarily control the narrative. You can create and control propaganda, but you cannot control time. And time always reveals who spoke of security and who was dismantling it. The question today is not whether Russia has security concerns, which you have used for 4 years to justify your unprecedented aggression against Ukraine. So my question is, why should the answer to these alleged concerns be drones and artillery? Concerns may be legitimate, but an invasion never is. Missiles are not an argument. I consider your missiles to be the physical admission of your own failure. Mr. Minister, the strength of a global power doesn't lie in its ability to start a war. The greatest strength lies in its ability to end one. So after 4 years, the world would like to hear simple answers from you. What does your victory look like? How many destroyed cities are enough? How many wasted lives are enough? Because if victory has no clear end, then it is not a strategy. It is a cynical autopilot. Security is not measured by the size of occupied territory. And so I now ask in all seriousness, is Russia safer today than it was 4 years ago? Does it have more partners? Does it have more stability? Does it have more trust? And if the truthful answer is negative, and indeed it is negative, then it is legitimate to ask whether the chosen path really leads to a greater security for your country. Wars do not end with a mere stroke of a pen. They end with the question, why? And one day, it will not be Ukraine answering this question. It will be Russia. Russia, whose heroes once fought side by side with European nations against Nazism. But today, the shadow of a new war falls over their memory. So, Mr. Lavrov, great nations can survive defeat. They cannot, however, survive a strategy that has no end. You might seize territory, but you cannot seize the future. History is full of powers that believed time was on their side. In reality, it was always working against them. Every war begins with a plan, but yours survives today only because you lack the courage to admit that this plan has failed. And it has been 4 years, so the time is running out. The time has come to finally stop this war. Let me conclude by thanking Ukraine for presenting a draft resolution to this Assembly. The Czech Republic will vote in favor of the resolution, and I would like to ask you all to do the same. Thank you very much.
I thank His Excellency, the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Czech Republic. I now give the floor to Her Excellency Baiba Braze, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Latvia.
Madam President, we are here because in 2014, the Russian Federation began its aggression against Ukraine. And 4 years ago, it launched a full-scale invasion. Ukraine has tabled a resolution today to show UN's support to peace. This is a chance for the UN membership to prove we all want peace. We want a just and lasting peace, and we want this war to stop. UN reports confirm that Russia has committed war crimes and atrocities in Ukraine at mass scale. And we must call Russia's crimes for what they are. As defined by Article 2 of the Genocide Convention, genocide is the intent, and I quote, to destroy in whole or in part a national, racial, or religious group, unquote. Russia's leaders have repeatedly denied Ukraine's right to exist. For example, I quote Vladimir Putin from June 23 of last year. I quote, "I have said many times that I consider the Russian and Ukrainian people to be one people. In this sense, all of Ukraine is ours. We have an old rule. Wherever a Russian soldier sets foot is ours." Unquote. Turning to Russia's actions, Russia has committed the following acts outlined in Article 2 of the Genocide Convention. Point 1, killing members of the group. According to UN reports, Russia has severely escalated its armed attacks against Ukrainian civilians over the past year. 2,000 missiles, 54,000 long-range drones, strategic bombers launched against civilians. And last year, the total number of killed and injured Ukrainian civilians rose by 31%. Point 2, Article 2 of the Genocide Convention, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group. Nearly 10 million Ukrainians forced to leave their homes, several million trapped under Russian illegal occupation, forced to give up their language, history, and culture. UN reports confirm war crimes, torture, sexual violence at mass scale by the Russian army. According to UNICEF, over 3,200 children killed during the war. Last year, 10% increase in child casualties. Point 3, Article 2 of the Genocide Convention, deliberately inflicting conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction. During the coldest winter of the decade, Russia has repeatedly bombed Ukraine's civilian and energy infrastructure, leaving millions of people without heating, electricity, water. People dying and freezing in their apartments, elderly and children. Hospitals, maternity wards, food and medicine storages, churches, religious, cultural sites, all destroyed. All intentionally. 4, forcibly transferring children. Russia has forcibly deported 20,000 Ukrainian children to Russia or Russia-controlled territory. These transfers are coordinated and state-executed. They are a war crime, confirmed by the ICC's indictment of Putin and Russia's Commissioner for Children's Rights, Lyubova Belova. She openly confessed to kidnapping a 15-year-old boy named Philip from Mariupol. Russia's words and actions align, and it's towards another genocide against the Ukrainian nation. Madam President, Russia's war is a threat to peace and security globally. It severely impacts global food and energy security. It is destroying entire ecosystems, and Russia's shadow fleet threatens maritime security. To tell you frankly, Russia's war is an imperial and colonial war. It is directly supported by Belarus, North Korean weapons, North Korean troops, and Iranian weapons. No one is safe from Russia's imperial ambitions. Citizens of countries in Africa, the Middle East, and Asia are manipulated and coerced by Russia, sent to front lines to kill Ukrainians. The world saw the horrific video of the young Kenyan engineer forced to attach a landmine to his chest, all while subjected to humiliating racist abuse by Russian army. I urge all countries to protect their citizens from this fate. Madam President, we stand for peace. We fully support peace efforts led by the US and partners. But we are also realistic. Only one state and one man are the sole reason why this war continues. And that one state is Russia, and that one man is Putin. The war must end. Putting pressure on Russia and ensuring accountability is what all states here can do. So Latvia supports the ICC, the Special Tribunal for the Crime of Aggression, and the compensation mechanism. But also the vote today. I vote everyone to vote in favor of the resolution. I thank you. Slava Ukraini.
I thank the Minister for Foreign Affairs of Latvia. I now give the floor to His Excellency Michael Damianu, Minister of Energy, Commerce and Industry of Cyprus.
Madam President, Excellencies, distinguished guests, delegates. 4 years have passed since the Russian Federation launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine. As we gather here today, we do so in remembrance of the victims, in solidarity with those who continue to suffer, and with a renewed sense of responsibility to uphold the principles enshrined in the Charter of the United Nations. In recent weeks, we have witnessed further large-scale attacks against Ukraine's critical energy infrastructure. These strikes have deprived civilians of electricity, heating, and water, particularly during the harsh winter months. Hospitals, schools, and other essential services have been severely disrupted. Such actions deepen an already grave humanitarian crisis and further exacerbate the suffering of the civilian population. For Cyprus, a country that continues to experience the consequences of illegal invasion and occupation, the principles of sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity are not abstract concepts. They are existential. They are grounded in our own history and in our unwavering commitment to international law. We therefore reiterate our clear and consistent support for Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity with its internationally recognized borders. The obligation of all states to refrain from the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state is a cornerstone of the international order. It is neither selective nor conditional. Excellencies, in line with Security Council Resolution 2774/2025 entitled Path for Peace and General Assembly Resolution ARES-ES 11/7 Advancing a Comprehensive, Just and Lasting Peace in Ukraine, Cyprus reaffirms its steadfast commitment to efforts aimed at achieving a credible, principled and sustainable peace. In this context, we also express our support for this year's resolution, Support for a Lasting Peace in Ukraine. We welcome ongoing diplomatic efforts aimed at ending the war, including the engagement of the United States in advancing this process. Any negotiation must ensure the full and meaningful participation of Ukraine. At the same time, Ukraine's security is indispensable from Europe's security. The European Union, therefore, has a legitimate role in discussing that affect its own security architecture. In its capacity as rotating presidency of the Council of the European Union, Cyprus has placed continued support for Ukraine at the forefront of its priorities. We remain committed to advancing the Union's broad-based assistance to Ukraine, including humanitarian relief, economic support, reconstruction efforts, and Ukraine's European aspirations. Any peace must also entail accountability. We underscore the importance of ensuring responsibility for serious violations of international law and of securing the safe return of Ukrainian children who have been unlawfully transferred or deported. Protecting their rights and ensuring their reunification with their families remains an urgent humanitarian imperative. Madam President, Cyprus stands firmly with Ukraine and its people. We will continue to support efforts aimed at achieving a just and lasting peace and to defend a rules-based international order where the sovereignty and security of every state, without exception, are fully respected. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished Minister of Cyprus. I now give the floor to His Excellency Stefan Dotti, Minister of State for Europe, North America and Overseas Territories of the United Kingdom.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. And I want to start by speaking directly to President Zelensky and you, dear Mariana, and all Ukrainians who have carried this war on your shoulders for 4 long years. The United Kingdom stands with you in our unwavering commitment to a just and lasting peace, and we salute your courage. And dear members of this General Assembly, despite the claims of the Russian representative, I tell you that Ukrainian civilians are living under relentless missile and drone attacks on their homes, businesses, hospitals and schools. And since October alone, Russia has fired almost 1,000 missiles and tens of thousands of drones. Millions have been left without heat or power, in temperatures falling to -20. And like some in this room, I too have been in Kiev under bombardment and have seen the destruction and the damage with my own eyes. This is the reality of Russia's war. But of course, the truth is that Russia is failing on the battlefield, and so it is weaponizing winter, and it's stepping up its attacks on civilians. It is tearing families apart through death, displacement, and deportation. And in a particularly heinous act that shames our world, Russia has abducted tens of thousands of Ukrainian children, ripping them from their communities and attempting to erase their identities. And UN reports have pointed to extensive evidence of men, women, and children being subjected to sexual violence. But let me be clear, dear members of this Assembly, Russia's war against Ukraine is a flagrant violation of the United Nations Charter. It has involved countless violations of human rights, and it must end. But the path to peace is clear. Ukraine agreed to a full, immediate, and unconditional ceasefire almost a year ago. Russia must now do the same. It must engage meaningfully with the United States-led peace process, withdraw its troops, return every stolen child and every prisoner of war. And let there be no doubt, Russia must and will be held accountable for the crimes it has committed. Because peace built on anything else less than this will not last. And that is why the United Kingdom and France are leading a coalition of the willing, with partners from across Europe alongside Canada and countries in the Asia-Pacific region. Together, we are supporting Ukraine now and working to ensure that any peace endures. And as Minister responsible for Europe, Ukraine has been at the centre of my discussions with partners around the world. We are increasing pressure to choke off the Russian war machine, including through sanctions, and we are keeping the focus firmly on a just and lasting peace. And Madam Chair, the United Kingdom has also signed a 100-year partnership with Ukraine, making clear our long-term commitment to a sovereign, secure and independent future for Ukraine. Our support is practical and sustained. We are helping to protect Ukrainian skies. We are supporting urgent energy repairs so schools can open and hospitals can function. And we are providing generators, equipment and protection for critical infrastructure. Indeed, today, Madam Chair, we have announced another £20 million in support for Ukraine to fix the damage caused to its energy grid by Russia's brutal attacks. And we are also working relentlessly for justice so that Russia's crimes are documented and answered for. So I say to members of this Assembly, remain steadfast in your commitment to the United Nations Charter, to the principle that international borders must not be changed by force, because the consequences of this invasion reach far beyond Europe, whether that is in relation to food security, energy markets, or indeed global stability and security. If we turn away from our common values and the laws that uphold the international system, the consequences will be graver still for all of us, for all of you and all of your peoples. And I say to the people of Ukraine, we know you are fighting for your freedom and your security, but also for the freedom and security of all nations. Your courage will never be forgotten. It inspires this Assembly, it inspires the people of the United Kingdom, and it reminds the world what is at stake when aggression goes unanswered. We know that all too well from our own history, and that is why we must continue to speak with clarity, unity and resolve. Russia can end this war. It can do so tomorrow by withdrawing its troops, ending its atrocities, ending its attacks on civilians and children and innocent civilians across Ukraine. But until then, this Assembly has a duty to put the truth on record, to build and sustain global pressure, and to stand unmistakably on the right side of history, on the side of peace, of sovereignty and of justice. Thank you, Madam Chair. Diolch yn fawr.
I thank the Minister of State of the United Kingdom. As decided earlier this morning, we shall now proceed to consider draft resolution A/ES11/L17. For your information, the draft resolution has closed for e-sponsorship. I now give the floor to the representative of the Secretariat.
Thank you, Madam President. I should like to announce that since the submission of the draft resolution, and in addition to the delegation listed on the document, the following countries have also become co-sponsors of A/ES11/L17. Albania, Andorra, Australia, Austria, Belgium, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Bulgaria, Canada, Croatia, Cyprus, Czechia, Denmark, Estonia, Finland, France, Georgia, Germany, Greece, Iceland, Ireland, Italy, Japan, Latvia, Liechtenstein, Lithuania, Luxembourg, Malta, Marshall Islands, Federated States of Micronesia, Monaco, Montenegro, Kingdom of the Netherlands, New Zealand, North Macedonia, Norway, Poland, Portugal, Republic of Moldova, Romania, San Marino, Slovenia, Spain, Sweden, Switzerland, and the United Kingdom. If any other countries wish to co-sponsor A/ES11/L17, please signify by pressing the microphone button now. I see none. I see now San Tome and Principe. San Tome and Principe. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of the Secretariat. Before giving the floor for explanations of vote before the vote, may I remind delegations that they are strongly urged to limit explanations of vote to 5 minutes, which should in any case not exceed 10 minutes. Explanations of vote are limited to 10 minutes and should be made from their seats. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela on behalf of the Group of Friends in defense of the Charter of the United Nations.
Muchas gracias, señora Presidenta.
Thank you very much, Madam President. The Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela has the honor to take the floor on behalf of the Group of Friends in defense of the Charter of the United Nations. Madam President, at the outset, allow us to reaffirm once again and without ambiguity our unwavering commitment to the purposes and principles enshrined in the Charter of the United Nations in their entirety and interconnectedness, including those referring to the sovereign equality of states, the peaceful settlement of disputes, the prohibition of the threat or the use of force, and the principles of self-determination and indivisible security. These are not abstract concepts. They are the very foundation upon which this organization has stood since its very establishment over 8 decades ago. In this context, we also reiterate that, as we've said on previous occasions, all armed conflict is a human tragedy. Every civilian life lost is a reminder of our collective failure to uphold peace. And it's precisely for that reason that this General Assembly must act with the utmost responsibility, prudence, and fidelity to the tenets enshrined in the UN Charter. Our actions must contribute always to de-escalation and not confrontation, to dialogue, not division, and to peace, not provocation. Regrettably, we are compelled to express serious concern regarding the timing and the substance of the draft resolution before us today. This initiative has been submitted without prior transparent consultations and also at a delicate stage of ongoing diplomatic efforts. As is well known, trilateral negotiations are currently underway, and a comprehensive settlement, rather than a standalone ceasefire, is being discussed as part of an advanced stage of talks between the parties. Therefore, our group is of the view that any action by this General Assembly that risks prejudging, disrupting, or politicizing such efforts must be approached with extreme caution. Peace cannot be built through texts, resolutions that deepen divisions, or that fail to take into account the legitimate security concerns and perspectives of all parties involved in a given conflict, particularly in the area, including in the area of security. Madam President, the draft resolution before us calls for an immediate, full, and unconditional ceasefire and reiterates support for a comprehensive, just, and lasting peace in line with international law. While these objectives are indeed laudable, we must ask ourselves whether the text before us will truly contribute towards the creation of conditions conducive to their long-awaited achievement. In this regard, it is important to highlight, for instance, that the draft resolution in question fails to address the question of the root causes that led to this conflict, including long-standing security arrangements, the principle of non-discrimination, and the need to ensure that no state strengthens its security at the expense of another. It also overlooks the complex historical and political context that has shaped the current situation. Consequently, we must emphasize that lasting peace would not emerge from selective narratives or from initiatives that aim to consolidate maximalist positions, nor can it result from the continued supply of arms, the imposition of unilateral coercive measures, or the perpetuation of bloc-based politics that fragment the international community, especially in the midst of the current international situation, where we see increasing polarization and mistrust among various actors. We thus reiterate what we have consistently reaffirmed. Security is indivisible. Lasting peace in Europe and, as a matter of fact, anywhere in the world requires a comprehensive security architecture that respects the legitimate concerns of all states and that upholds in a balanced and non-selective manner the full spectrum of the principles contained in the founding Charter of the United Nations. Madam President, we're also mindful of procedural concerns raised regarding the resumption of this emergency special session of the General Assembly. The Security Council, through its most recent resolution 2774, has called for a peaceful settlement of the conflict we are addressing today. The primary responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security rests with that organ, as established by the foundational charter of our organization. Therefore, this General Assembly must ensure that its actions complement rather than complicate ongoing diplomatic efforts. And we would stress here that repeated recourse to divisive resolutions has, over the past 4 years, neither ended the conflict nor alleviated the suffering of civilians. On the contrary, such approaches have often coincided with further escalation on the ground. The peoples of Ukraine and the Russian Federation deserve peace, but real, lasting, negotiated peace. But peace, Madam President, will not be achieved through initiatives that one of the main parties to the conflict views as disruptive to negotiations currently underway. Therefore, the Group of Friends in Defence of the Charter of the United Nations is compelled to call upon Member States to act with wisdom and restraint. We urge all delegations to give genuine diplomacy a chance, to avoid steps that could undermine ongoing negotiations, and to recommit themselves to the peaceful settlement of disputes in strict adherence to the UN Charter. Madam President, we must not allow this General Assembly to be transformed into an arena for geopolitical contests. Instead, it should serve as a space for fostering dialogue, for building trust and promoting inclusive solutions that address, amongst other things, the root causes of conflicts, including as a concrete means to prevent their re-emergence in the future. In closing, we reiterate our position of principle. Lasting peace cannot be imposed. It must be negotiated. It cannot be selective. It must be comprehensive. And it cannot be achieved at the expense of the legitimate security concerns of any state. Therefore, we appeal to rise above divisions today and act in a responsible manner. Let us, therefore, give peace a real chance. Thank you very much, Madam President. Thank you to the distinguished representative of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela.
I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Nicaragua.
Señora Presidenta.
Madam President, Nicaragua reaffirms its commitment to the purposes and principles of the United Nations Charter, sovereign equality of states, sovereignty, non-interference, and the peaceful settlement of disputes. Lasting peace requires solutions through peaceful diplomatic means, a guarantee of security, and a realistic approach that will favor understanding, avoiding politicization, and the selective use of this General Assembly. we see that this special emergency session has been used repeatedly to impose political projects, selective projects which deepen divisions among member states and reduce the space for mutual good faith understanding. These initiatives put forward end up substituting dialogue because of pressure. And this shows the lack of goodwill of certain countries and European countries to engage in serious negotiations to come up with serious results. In this context, Nicaragua very much appreciates the goodwill being shown by the government of the Russian Federation to engage in conversations between the parties. This deserves respect and political support. At the same time, our delegation feels that political and military support from NATO is escalating the conflict, as well as certain Western countries that are inciting confrontation and prolonging hostilities with the warlike rhetoric and constant flow of arms. In addition to this, we have disinformation campaigns and a media campaign led by major communication organizations to change perceptions and lead to a policy of confrontation. Madam President, on behalf of the government and people of Nicaragua, we express our firm solidarity with the Russian Federation, and we recognize the determination with which they are facing neo-fascist and neo-Nazi movements occurring in Ukraine. The Western countries are promoting hate and making it impossible to bring about any kind of understanding and reconciliation. Nicaragua feels that the draft resolution entitled Support for Lasting Peace in Ukraine does nothing to create conditions for a realistic and sustainable political outcome, and that's why Nicaragua will vote against the draft. We are convinced that serious negotiations with a security focus and guarantees for the parties are what constitute the path towards genuine, lasting peace that will address the root causes of the conflict. Thank you very much.
Gracias al representante de Nicaragua.
Thank you very much to the representative of Nicaragua.
We have heard the last speaker in explanation of vote before the vote. I give the floor to the permanent representative of the Republic of Korea on a point of order.
Madam President, the Republic of Korea wishes to join the co-sponsorship of this draft resolution. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the Republic of Korea. Before proceeding further, I wish to address the question concerning the majority required for the adoption of the draft resolution. In light of Article 18, paragraphs 2 and 3 of the Charter of the United Nations, is there any objection to take an action on draft resolution A/ES11/L17 by a 2/3 majority of the members present and voting? I see no objection. The 2/3 majority of members present and voting is therefore required for the adoption of the draft resolution A/ES11/L17. The Assembly will now take a decision on draft resolution A/ES11/L17 entitled Support for Lasting Peace in Ukraine. A separate recorded vote has been requested on the second preambular paragraph and operative paragraph 2 of draft resolution A/ES11 L17. Is there any objection to this? I give the floor to the representative of Ukraine.
Thank you, Madam President. We note with great disappointment the motion for division proposed by the delegation of the United States of America on draft resolution A/ES 11/L.17. The proposed deletions of PP2 and LP2 are deeply concerning and cannot be accepted. The draft resolution submitted by Ukraine is clear, concise, containing the agreed language, and it reflects the core principles of the international law, including the UN Charter. The provisions targeted by the United States refer to the principles of sovereignty and territorial integrity, unity of member states, including Ukraine. Weakening or removing this language would send a very dangerous signal that these fundamental principles are negotiable. Secondly, the call for a comprehensive, just and lasting peace in line with international law, including the UN Charter, has been supported by over 141 UN member states. We strongly urge maintaining both paragraphs in full. Therefore, we reject the motion for division. Our delegation calls for a recorded vote on the motion for division. Ukraine will vote no, which means against motion of division, and calls on all delegations to vote no. To avoid confusion, before the vote, I would like to ask the Secretariat and the President to explain clearly to all the delegations what a yes vote and a no vote mean in this regard. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of Ukraine. An objection has been made to the request for division. In accordance with Rule 89, if objection is made to the request for division, the motion for division shall be voted upon. Permission to speak on the motion for division shall be given only to 2 speakers in favor and 2 speakers against. I call on the representative of the United Nations. I'm sorry, of the United States, obviously.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The United States moves under Rule 89 for PP2 and OP2 to be voted. While the United States welcomes the resolution's call for an immediate ceasefire, our view is that certain language in the resolution is likely to distract from ongoing negotiations, rather than support discussion of the full range of diplomatic avenues that may pave the way to durable peace. For this reason, the United States requests the 2 paragraphs be voted. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the United States. I now call on the representative of France.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you very much, Madam President. As the invasion of Ukraine enters its 5th year, Ukraine proposes to this Assembly a draft resolution that supports the momentum of peace efforts currently underway, and one that recalls the principles of the United Nations Charter. Regarding armed aggression, the reference to these principles is absolutely essential for all member states, because a peace that is not based on the principles of the Charter will simply neither be just nor lasting. Accepting a motion for division of this text would mean that the GA would be voting against the principles of the Charter. That is why we call on all member states to vote against this motion for division and then vote in favor of the draft resolution in its entirety. I thank you.
I thank the representative of France. In accordance with Rule 89, I shall now put to a recorded vote the motion for division. We shall now begin the voting process. Those in favor of the motion for division, please signify. Those against and abstentions.
The Assembly is now voting on the motion for division. Delegation voting yes means that you agree with the proposal of the United States that there should be first a vote on those two paragraphs before proceeding to action on the draft resolution itself. So yes means that you agree with the proposal by the United States with the motion for division. And the no vote means that you are against having a separate vote on these two paragraphs as proposed by the United States. Will all delegations confirm that the votes are accurately reflected on the screen? The voting has been completed. Please lock the machine.
The result of the vote is as follows. In favor, 11. Against, 69. Abstentions, 62. The motion for division is not adopted. A recorded vote has been requested on the draft resolution. We shall now begin the voting process. Those in favor of draft resolution A/ES11/L17, please signify. Those against, abstentions.
The Assembly is now voting on draft resolution A/ES11/L17 entitled Support for Lasting Peace in Ukraine. Will all delegations confirm that the votes are accurately reflected on the screen? The voting has been completed. Please lock the machine.
The result of the vote is as follows. In favor, 107. Against, 12. Abstentions, 51. Draft resolution A/ES11/L17 is adopted. Before giving the floor for explanations of vote after the vote, may I remind delegations that they are strongly urged to limit explanations of vote to 5 minutes, which should in any case not exceed 10 minutes and be made from their seats. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Bahrain on behalf of Gulf Cooperation Council.
Madam President, it is my honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the Gulf Cooperation Council members. The United Arab Emirates, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the Sultanate of Oman, the State of Qatar, the State of Kuwait, and my country, Bahrain. Madam President, we regret that the Russian-Ukraine crisis continues for the 5th year today, and its repercussions on civilians, especially women and children, as well as the effects on vital infrastructure and civilian infrastructure as military operations continue and the prices paid by civilians. We renew and we reaffirm our principled position regarding the Russian-Ukraine crisis based on the principles of international law and the UN Charter. and maintaining the current international order based on the respect of the sovereignty and political independence of states without interference in their internal affairs and without the use of force or threat to use force. Madam President, our countries have abstained from voting on the draft resolution at the General Assembly today. There are diplomatic discussions being carried out right now between Russia and Ukraine. We hope that these negotiations lead to tangible results, leading to a sustainable, peaceful solution to the war in Ukraine, leading to international security and stability. Diplomatic negotiations and consultations are the only solution leading to security and peace. In this vein, we stress that we support all initiatives and diplomatic efforts as to complement the current efforts in order to reach a political solution between Russia and Ukraine. We welcome the U.S. efforts to end the war in order to preserve stability and security in Europe. In this vein, the GCC members have adopted an effective mediation approach. We facilitated political consultations on the Ukraine crisis. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, in fact, hosted talks between Russia and the United States in Riyadh, and the UAE hosted the tripartite talks between the United States, Russia, and Ukraine in Abu Dhabi. The KSA mediation efforts led to the release of prisoners of war. And Qatar succeeded, the UAE efforts succeeded in leading to the exchange of 314 prisoners of wars. The total number of prisoners of wars exchanged between the two countries during these mediations has reached 4,955. In addition, the state of Qatar has reunited 155 children affected by the crisis with their families, alleviating the humanitarian crisis. In conclusion, we stress our commitment to continue our humanitarian efforts to help those affected by the Ukraine-Russia crisis, and we will continue with our political efforts to ensure convergence towards peace, because we believe there's a need to solve conflicts peacefully and alleviate their humanitarian repercussions. Thank you.
I thank the permanent representative of Bahrain and now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the United States.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Russia-Ukraine war must end now. Under President Trump's leadership, the United States continues to devote energy and effort at the highest levels to bring both Russia and Ukraine closer to a negotiated agreement that will finally end the bloodshed and destruction. Ending the war, of course, is the right thing to do, but no one is suggesting it will be easy. It will require sacrifices and compromises. In this regard, the United States calls on everyone to do all in their power to lower the rhetoric and engage in good faith. Our dedicated negotiators have a keen sense of the realities on the ground as they continue to work with the parties to forge an agreement on the outstanding issues in the most expeditious manner possible. The United States welcomes, of course, the call for an immediate ceasefire. As we've said, this resolution also includes language that is likely to distract from ongoing negotiations rather than support discussion of the full range of diplomatic avenues that may pave the way to that durable peace. For this reason, the United States called for a vote on OP2 and on the two paragraphs, and ultimately chose to abstain on the resolution. What is needed now to end the war is political will. We believe we are closer to a deal than at any point since this war began. Let this be the last anniversary of an ongoing war that has continued for far too long and at far too great a cost. Let's end it now. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of the United States. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of China.
President, China abstained from voting on the draft resolution that was just put to vote in the GA. This vote reflects our consistent principle and position on the question of Ukraine. China has always maintained that sovereignty and territorial integrity of all countries should be respected. The purposes and principles of the UN Charter should be observed. The legitimate security concerns of all parties should be taken seriously, and all efforts conducive to the peaceful settlement of the crisis should be supported. At present, the Ukraine issue has entered a critical stage for a negotiated settlement. Various dialogues and contacts are being intensively advanced. In particular, with a growing focus on the substantive issue of the crisis, we welcome these developments. China welcomes and supports all efforts dedicated to peace and calls on the parties concerned to maintain positive momentum, continue building consensus, and strive to reach a comprehensive, lasting, and binding peace agreement. By addressing the root causes of the crisis, it is important to establish a more balanced, effective, and sustainable European security architecture so as to achieve long-term stability and security in Europe. At this critical juncture, we hope that the international community will help create favorable conditions for a political settlement of this crisis and expect the GA to play a constructive role in building consensus for peace among member states. China will continue to make active efforts to advance the political settlement of the crisis. Thank you, President.
I thank the distinguished representative of China and now give the floor to the distinguished representative of South Africa.
Thank you, Madam President. We would like to thank you for convening the 11th Emergency Special Session of the United Nations General Assembly to consider the draft resolution on the support for lasting peace in Ukraine. It is regrettable that we are meeting on the 4th anniversary of a war that could have been resolved diplomatically rather than through a protracted conflict. This conflict has led to wanton destruction and the death of many in Ukraine and the Russian Federation and affected the security of the wider European region. The human and negative economic impact and tension arising from the conflict has affected all of us, including African countries, underscoring the fact that we live in an interconnected world. President, the well-being of all people in situations of conflict remains central to the purpose of the United Nations. Preventing the worsening humanitarian situation should be our primary focus. The importance of taking every precaution to avoid targeting civilians, civilian infrastructure, and critical energy infrastructure cannot be overstated. South Africa also reiterates its continued support for the protection of children on all sides and their inviolable right to grow up in peace in a social context that respects their identity and celebrates their humanity. President, now more than ever, at this inflection point in the stability of the global order, there is a need for a peaceful and negotiated resolution of this and other persistent conflicts, with the UN at the center, in line with a rules-based order, with due respect for international law, including the UN Charter. Critically, there must be adherence to the sovereignty and territorial integrity of all states, the core principles upon which the United Nations was founded more than 80 years ago. This also requires adherence to the Just Kogan's norm that prohibits the acquisition of land through the use of force or threat thereof. South Africa therefore commends all efforts aimed at bringing about a just peace and reiterates its continued firm support for the diplomatic resolution of the war in Ukraine. This is an endeavor which we have consistently pursued bilaterally, including through the African Peace Initiative, which remains one of the only efforts to constructively engage both sides of the conflict. President, we have today considered another draft resolution on the situation in Ukraine. The operative elements of the resolution is in line with South Africa's approach to this conflict. It's lamentable, though, that once again the text was produced in a restrictive manner without all member states being afforded an equal opportunity to contribute to its drafting. Consequently, it ignored the constructive contributions of many states committed to peace in Ukraine and does not meet the necessary threshold of collective action as envisaged by an institution of this nature, thus perpetuating a perception that some views and initiatives are more important than others. South Africa, however, did not vote against the resolution before the Assembly today, as it echoes our call for all member states to remain resolutely committed to the peaceful and negotiated settlement of this conflict, while at the same time firmly recognizing the primacy of the United Nations in advancing the cause of peace without fear or favor. Once again, we implore all member states to recommit to inclusivity, which is a central tenet critical to a prosperous global order. This commitment starts with collective action in pursuit of a peaceful resolution of this protracted conflict in line with international law. I thank you.
I thank the Chargé d'Affaires of South Africa and now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Thailand.
Thank you, Madam President. Thailand has voted in favor of the draft resolution as it calls for immediate ceasefire and a lasting peace in Ukraine in accordance with international law and the UN Charter. Our vote also reflects our deep concern over humanitarian consequences of the conflict, which has led to the continued loss of innocent lives, the destruction of civilian infrastructure, and the severe sufferings endured by civilians on the ground. As today marks the 4th year of the conflict in Ukraine, Thailand joins the international community in calling for an immediate, full, and unconditional ceasefire to alleviate people's suffering and ensure unhindered delivery of humanitarian assistance. We urge all parties to exercise maximum restraint, fully respect international law, including international humanitarian law, and take all necessary measures to prevent further escalation and protect innocent lives. On our part, Thailand has provided humanitarian assistance, both in the form of financial contribution and relief items to the people in the affected areas. Most recently in January 2026 through the Thai Red Cross Society. Moreover, the Thai Civilian Deminer Association has supported Ukraine humanitarian demining as part of recovery efforts aimed at restoring agricultural land and livelihoods in the country. Thailand fully supports the peaceful settlement of disputes and reiterates its call on all parties to engage in constructive dialogue that is inclusive, forward-looking, and grounded in mutual trust and respect, with an aim to de-escalate tensions and find a sustainable pathway towards peace. We thus welcome all diplomatic efforts in this regard, including the recent peace talk held in Abu Dhabi and Geneva. Thailand reaffirms its unwavering commitment to its obligation under international law and the purposes and principles enshrined in the UN Charter, which must remain for the foundation for addressing the situation and for advancing a just and lasting peace in Ukraine. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Thailand. I now give the floor to the permanent representative of Cuba.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, Cuba voted against the draft resolution L17 because we feel it does not contribute or provide help to negotiations to bring about lasting peace with the participation of all parties involved. The support for lasting peace in Ukraine, as reflected in the title of this resolution, should take into account the legitimate concerns of all, and this initiative lacks that. by making only one party responsible and not recognizing the responsibility of those that deployed aggressive actions that led to the escalation of the conflict, this resolution is only giving a partial, distorted view of the facts. It will not be possible to achieve peace through political manipulation, double standards and selectivity. We have emphatically opposed these approaches in the General Assembly. All of this, rather than helping to solve the conflict, which could have been avoided, is only exacerbating differences. Madam President, Cuba has not been and will never be a part of the conflict in Ukraine, despite several attempts by the United States and other governments to link us to this conflict. We are faithful to our principles in full respect of the United Nations Charter and international law. We will maintain a firm defense of peace and oppose the use or the threat of use of force against any state. And we reaffirm our rejection of the increasing arms race, sanctions, unilateral measures that only deepen the causes of conflict and its lamentable consequences. In accordance with our commitment to international humanitarian law, we reiterate our call to all the parties to protect the civilian population, their goods and civilian infrastructure. We support efforts to alleviate the humanitarian situation and minimize the suffering of the population in the conflict area. We very much regret the loss of innocent lives in this war. Madam President, Cuba will continue to advocate for a serious diplomatic solution that is constructive and realistic of the current crisis in Ukraine through peaceful means in strict adherence to international law that will guarantee the sovereignty and address the legitimate security concerns of all parties, particularly address the underlying causes of the conflict. Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you very much to the permanent representative of Cuba.
The floor to the distinguished representative of Egypt.
سيد الرئيس يأتي اجتماعنا
Madam President, we are holding this meeting today as the Russia-Ukraine crisis enters its fifth year. It is no secret that this crisis has not only affected the two parties to the conflict and their immediate regional surroundings, but has also cast a profoundly negative shadow on the countries of the global south, particularly African nations. Egypt has been at the heart of these challenges. It has been directly affected by the disruptions affecting food security, supply chains, and rising energy prices. In this context, Egypt has actively engaged in all sincere efforts to end the conflict, whether through initiatives, actions, or draft resolutions. Egypt participated in the Arab Contact Group at the ministerial level in June 2022, at the African Leaders Initiative in July 2023, and finally joined the core group of the Friends of Peace in September 2024. From this perspective, Egypt's position on the crisis was based on a number of firm principles, which are key in reflecting Egypt's principled position applied to all issues facing the world, regardless of their context or geographical location. They are as follows. 1. Reaching sustainable solutions to conflicts should be based on the purposes and principles of the UN Charter without selectivity, and should be based on the principles of international law, including through dialogue, the peaceful settlement of disputes, and the rights of peoples to self-determination. 2. A sustainable settlement and a lasting settlement of the conflict cannot be achieved without addressing the root causes of the crisis and the legitimate security concerns of states. and without respecting the linguistic and cultural rights of the population. Neglecting this aspect leads to an incomplete understanding of the crisis. Therefore, there's a need to address the crisis from a comprehensive perspective that includes a ceasefire in parallel with reaching solutions to all other outstanding issues and addressing the real root causes of the crisis. Three, the need to maintain and strengthen effective diplomatic channels to reach a sustainable settlement to the crisis. It is also important to refrain from using various tools that fuel the conflict and deepen polarization, such as the use of economic sanctions. In this regard, we welcome the ongoing U.S. efforts to reach a solution to the crisis and the serious engagement of all parties in them. And we emphasize the need to prioritize the success of the ongoing negotiations. 4. It is important for the international community to avoid double standards and deal with existing conflicts on an equal footing without discrimination based on the location or the context of the crisis. Madam President, Egypt voted in favor of the draft resolution today, consistent with our position since the beginning of the crisis, when we voted in favor of all resolutions calling for a peaceful settlement. We believe that the time has come more than any time ever to reach a durable settlement to the ongoing crisis and achieve peace, to spare the world, both developed and developing, the extremely dangerous repercussions of a crisis of this magnitude. Egypt believes that every war has an end, and that voices of reason bear an added responsibility during times of conflict to remain steadfast in their call for a ceasefire and the triumph of wisdom. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the distinguished representative of Egypt and now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Malaysia.
Madam President, Malaysia remains deeply concerned over the continuing conflict, which has now reached its 4-year mark, with devastating loss of lives on both sides. The high level of civilian casualties also continues to increase, and the impacts are felt at the global scale. My delegation voted in favor of the resolution adopted by the Assembly earlier today, in line with our unwavering commitment to upholding the UN Charter and international law, including the cardinal principles of respect for the sovereignty, independence, territorial integrity of states, and the peaceful resolution of disputes. Malaysia has consistently supported a comprehensive and inclusive resolution of the conflict based on the UN Charter and international law. Against this backdrop, we welcome the ongoing efforts of the international community to resolve the conflict. The importance of compliance of parties to the UN Charter and international humanitarian law, including the protection of civilians, cannot be overstated. We reiterate the imperative of inclusive dialogue and diplomacy with a view to addressing the root causes of the conflict and taking into account the legitimate security concerns of all parties to achieve sustainable peace in Ukraine. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Malaysia. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Islamic Republic of Iran.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Madam President, I would like to reiterate my delegation's consistent position, which has been expressed numerous times during 11 special sessions since 2022. The Islamic Republic of Iran reiterates its principled position that all disputes should be resolved through peaceful means and dialogue in accordance with international law, including the Charter of the United Nations. Since the onset of this crisis in Ukraine, the Islamic Republic of Iran has maintained a clear, consistent, and unwavering position. We have underscored that all UN member states must fully respect the purposes and principles enshrined in the Charter of the United Nations and international law, including sovereignty, independence, unity, and territorial integrity, as well as the obligation to respect internationally recognized borders and to refrain from the threat or use of force. My delegation has consistently supported efforts to achieve lasting peace and has maintained that long-term sustainable solutions to this crisis require addressing the root causes of the conflict, including provocative action and decision by certain states and NATO. Regrettably, the current resolution fails to do so. Moreover, as this text was presented at an inopportune time and without prior transparent consultations, it not only fails to advance peace, but may also exacerbate existing divisions. We have some concerns that the purposes of this resolution is not to support lasting peace in Ukraine, but rather to serve as a political maneuver in an ongoing geopolitical rivalry. For this reason, my delegation voted against the resolution. Finally, it should be emphasized that the Islamic Republic of Iran will continue its constructive engagement in support of a peaceful resolution to this crisis. Regrettably, the Islamic Republic of Iran has been facing baseless allegation of supporting one side in this conflict, claims that my delegation has repeatedly denied and continues to categorically reject. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Islamic Republic of Iran. We have heard the last speaker in explanation of vote after vote. As agreed earlier, the Assembly will now resume its debate on Agenda Item 5. Our next speaker is His Excellency Lasha Darsali, Deputy Minister for Foreign Affairs of Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Today marks 4 years since the Russian Federation launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine, a grave violation of international law and a direct assault on the principles enshrined in the UN Charter. This act of aggression is not merely an attack against a sovereign state. It is a challenge to the very foundation of the international rules-based order and the security architecture that underpins global stability. Georgia unequivocally condemns the immense human suffering and widespread destruction caused by Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine. Since the outset of Russia's full-scale invasion, Georgia has sponsored, joined, or supported more than 800 documents and initiatives across major international organizations, including laws establishing specific accountability mechanisms in support of Ukraine. Georgia is a founding member of the Register of Damage and has recently signed the Council of Europe Convention establishing the International Claims Commission for Ukraine, important steps towards advancing accountability and enabling reparations for the damage caused by Russia's aggression. Georgia stands firmly with the Ukrainian people. We have provided humanitarian assistance and continue to host thousands of war-affected Ukrainians, ensuring access to accommodation, education, healthcare, and social services. Excellencies, Georgia knows firsthand the consequences of occupation. Russia continues its illegal military presence in Georgia's Abkhazia and Tkhinvali regions, where the security, human rights, and humanitarian situation remains deeply concerning, and access for international monitoring mechanisms continues to be denied. The international community must remain united and resolute. Attempts to redraw internationally recognized borders by force must never be tolerated. Georgia understands well the price of peace and its importance for a stable and prosperous future for our region. We welcome all genuine efforts aimed at ending the war and achieving lasting peace. Georgia reaffirms unwavering support for Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity within its internationally recognized borders and for upholding a rules-based international order grounded in the UN Charter and accountability for violation of international law. Thank you very much.
I thank the distinguished Deputy Minister of Georgia. I now give the floor to His Excellency Thomas Gerber, Deputy State Secretary of Switzerland.
Madame la Présidente.
Madam President, today the General Assembly has adopted a draft resolution calling for an immediate ceasefire, the exchange of prisoners, and the return of detained civilians and deported children. Switzerland has voted in favor, supported this. 4 years ago, Russia launched its war against Ukraine in flagrant violation of international law. 4 years of human suffering, massive destruction, and serious violations of the international legal order based on the rule of law. This has become increasingly unacceptable. This grim anniversary is an opportunity to reaffirm several essential principles. Firstly, attacks on energy infrastructure, particularly in winter, deprive millions of civilians of electricity, water, and heating, with serious and unacceptable humanitarian consequences. All parties must strictly comply with international humanitarian law, including the principles of distinction, proportionality, and precaution. Attacks against civilian property are strictly prohibited. Property essential to the survival of the civilian population also benefits from special protection. Switzerland condemns attacks that cause massive suffering to the civilian population and is concerned about the escalation of the war, particularly through the use of weapons systems with high destructive capacity, such as the Oreshnik missile, which increase risks to regional security. Switzerland reaffirms its full solidarity with the Ukrainian people. It will continue to support the reconstruction of Ukraine, which it considers to be a strategic objective, and will provide Ukraine with generators and equipment intended to maintain access to essential services. Secondly, the temporarily occupied territories are an integral part of Ukraine. Any attempt to annex or change borders by force is a clear violation of the United Nations Charter and of international law. Switzerland does not recognize these annexations. The protection of civilians and persons hors de combat must be guaranteed at all times, in accordance with international humanitarian law and international human rights law. Forced transfers, arbitrary detentions and deportations, particularly of children, are prohibited and must cease immediately. Those affected must be able to return home safely and with dignity. Prisoners of war must be treated in accordance with international humanitarian law. Switzerland also calls for safe, rapid and unhindered humanitarian access to the temporarily occupied territories, as well as the facilitation of civilian movements between territories in order to restore family ties and allow access to services. We are also alarmed by reports of serious violations and reiterate that international crimes must be investigated independently and impartially, and their perpetrators brought to justice. In this regard, we take note of the arrest warrants issued by the International Criminal Court and reiterate our support for the court. Thirdly, Switzerland strongly reaffirms its condemnation of this war. It calls on Russia to immediately de-escalate the situation, to cease all combat operations and withdraw, without delay, its troops from all Ukrainian territory. Only a peace that complies with international law and the United Nations Charter can be just and lasting. Ukraine must be fully involved in any peace initiative concerning it. Since the start of the war, Switzerland has offered its good offices and remains ready to contribute, if the parties so wish, to any credible initiative aimed at achieving a just and lasting peace for Ukraine. We welcome the recent efforts at dialogue, including the discussions held in Geneva, and remain willing to facilitate exchanges where this can help to create conditions conducive to peace. In its capacity as chair of the OSCE, Switzerland intends to contribute to strengthening European security and inclusive multilateral diplomacy based on dialogue, conflict prevention, and respect for international law and existing commitments. Madam President, when the Security Council is paralyzed, the General Assembly bears a special responsibility for upholding the principles of the Charter. By supporting this resolution, we affirm our commitment to a just and lasting peace. Respect for international law remains the only solid foundation for restoring peace and security in Europe and beyond. Thank you. I thank the Deputy Secretary of State of Switzerland.
To the distinguished representative of Denmark on behalf of the Nordic countries.
Thank you, Madam President. I have the honor to speak on behalf of the 5 Nordic countries, Finland, Iceland, Norway, Sweden, and my own country, Denmark. We're here to mark the grim 4th anniversary of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. A war of aggression in flagrant violation of international law, including the UN Charter. An unprovoked war that President Putin chose to wage against a peaceful neighbor. What the Kremlin thought would be a 3-day, quote, special military operation, unquote, has now entered day 1,461, the largest military conflict on European soil since the Second World War. A war that the UN estimates has killed or injured at least 55,000 Ukrainian civilians, including more than 3,000 children. While Ukraine has repeatedly called for a ceasefire, Russia has escalated its attacks. 2025 was the deadliest year of the war for Ukraine's civilians. No one feels the effects of this war more than the people of Ukraine. No one wants peace more than the people of Ukraine. Madam President, peace in Ukraine must be just, lasting, and comprehensive. It must respect international law, including the UN Charter. Ukraine must also have robust security guarantees to prevent Russia from invading ever again. And Russia needs to be held accountable for the crimes it has committed in Ukraine. We cannot stand by as the UN Charter is violated with impunity and territory is seized by force. To do so would only encourage further aggression and the undermining of international peace and security. Put simply, in such a world where we return to an era of might is right, no country would be safe. Madam President, the Nordic countries were pleased to co-sponsor Ukraine's resolutions. It called for an immediate, full, and unconditional ceasefire, for a comprehensive, just, and lasting peace in line with international law, including the UN Charter, and for confidence-building measures, including the complete exchange of prisoners of war, the release of all unlawfully detained persons, and the return of all internees and civilians forcibly transferred or deported, including thousands of children. We are pleased that Ukraine's resolution was adopted by the General Assembly by an overwhelming
majority. We must all continue to show our commitment to peace, international law, and the principles of sovereignty and territorial integrity. So let this anniversary serve not only as an opportunity to reflect, but also to recommit collectively and forcefully to these principles. Principles upon which we all rely to live in peace within our internationally recognized borders. I thank you.
I thank the permanent representative of Denmark, and now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the European Union. On behalf of the European Union and its member states.
Madam President, I have the honor to make this statement on behalf of the EU and 26 of its member states listed in the written version. Today we mark a tragic anniversary, 4 years of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, an egregious violation of the UN Charter by a permanent member of the UN Security Council. I want to express my deep solidarity to the Ukrainian people, who have suffered immensely as a result. Their resilience in defending their country from Russia's brutal aggression and standing up for the principles of the UN Charter is profoundly humbling and an inspiration to us all. The reason the UN General Assembly has been seized once again of the situation in Ukraine is because the Russian Federation has blocked any meaningful UNSC action. The only resolution it has allowed to pass was in February last year, which called for a swift end to the conflict, remember? And which has simply been refused by Russia in its implementation. Here are the facts. The past year, Russia has massively escalated its attacks. In 2025, it launched over 54,000 long-range drones and over 1,900 missiles against Ukraine. A 10% increase in child casualties has been reported. In the middle of a freezing winter, Russia has cynically and systematically targeted Ukraine's energy infrastructure, deliberately hurting civilians. These are not actions of a country interested in ending its war of aggression. Intentionally directing attacks against civilians and civilian objects is a war crime. Its perpetrators must be held fully accountable. Colleagues, Russia's aggression has also had far-reaching repercussions beyond Ukraine's borders. It has disrupted global food and energy markets and has affected countries in Africa, in Latin America, in Asia, thousands of kilometers away from Ukraine. Politically, the war has deepened divisions among countries and eroded trust in international institutions and norms. It has turned attention and resources away from global public efforts such as cooperation on trade, development, and climate change. We urge Russia once again to end its aggression and call on all members of the UN to ensure that Russia engages in meaningful negotiations. The short and streamlined resolution we adopted today with an overwhelming majority recalls the most fundamental principles of the UN Charter that we all adhere to and has 3 operational paragraphs calling for, first, an immediate, full and unconditional ceasefire, second, a just and lasting peace in line with the UN Charter and international law, and third, confidence-building measures between the two sides. This resolution is a clear message of support to ongoing peace efforts. It's fully in line with what the majority of UN members have called for since the start of Russia's aggression. This resolution is a message. Your vote in favor of the resolution was a vote for peace and for the UN Charter. Colleagues, the rules and principles enshrined in the UN Charter, sovereignty, territorial integrity, and the peaceful settlements of disputes, are international obligations binding all states. They are under strain in Ukraine and elsewhere. Respect for them is essential for the security of all states, large and small alike. How this war ends will further shape the future perception of these principles. If aggression is rewarded or normalized, sovereignty and territorial integrity risk becoming perceived as negotiable, weakening international stability across the globe everywhere. If Russia is allowed to change borders by force, others can try too. Why not? Colleagues, I reaffirm the EU's continued and unwavering support for Ukraine's independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity within its internationally recognized borders. We welcome the ongoing diplomatic efforts to put an end to the war. In coordination with our partners, we will continue to pursue an immediate ceasefire and a just and lasting peace, and provide comprehensive political, financial, economic, humanitarian, military, and diplomatic support to Ukraine and its people. And to close, I also call for the swift implementation of ESS Resolution 11-9 on the return of Ukrainian children, adopted by a clear majority in December 2025, in response to UN-verified evidence of forcible transfer and deportation of Ukrainian children. We look forward to updates on how the UN Secretary-General has exercised his good offices to facilitate the children's return and to ensure access for international monitoring and humanitarian organizations. Colleagues, this is a very sad, a very somber anniversary, marking the 4th year of Russia's aggression. But maybe there's hope after the vote on this resolution that we can all exercise our pressure, our convincing powers on Russia to stop this war and to do it now. Thank you.
I thank the head of delegation of the European Union and now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Austria.
Thank you, Madam President. 4 years ago, early in the morning, I received a call and somebody informed me that the war has started. It still shocks me today. 4 years ago, the Russian Federation shocked the world by invading its independent and sovereign neighbor, Ukraine, in blatant disregard of the most basic principles of the UN Charter. This unprovoked attack has led to human suffering not seen on the European continent for decades. Millions of lives uprooted, livelihoods destroyed, and tens of thousands of innocent civilians killed in senseless and relentless targeting of civilian infrastructure by Russia. Let me be clear, international humanitarian law is unequivocal. Civilians must never be the target of attacks. And yet, as I speak, Ukrainians have been enduring a harsh winter under merciless drone strikes and bombardments. With heating systems failing, hospitals struggling, and children sleeping in the cold. This must stop. Excellencies, Austria is a militarily neutral country, but neutrality has never meant indifference. It also does not mean moral ambiguity in the face of violations of the Charter. On the contrary, as a neutral country, Austria relies even more than others on the respect of our common norms and the strength of the UN Charter. This is why Austria consistently advocates for upholding the rule of law, not least as chair of the group of friends on the rule of law. Ukraine is not the only country that has suffered illegal attacks and violations of its sovereignty. And Austria has consistently raised its voice against violations wherever they may occur. The principles we defend in Kiev must equally apply in Gaza, in Sudan, in Haiti, and wherever civilians are under attack and international law is violated. As the international community, we should not, we must not accept that the most basic rules are undermined and weakened while the ones violating the Charter shield themselves from scrutiny with the veto in the Security Council. Excellencies, Austria does not provide weapons to Ukraine, but solidarity takes many forms. Since February 2022, nearly 100,000 Ukrainians have found refuge in Austria. Austria has provided bilaterally, in addition to EU contributions, 350 million euros of bilateral financial and humanitarian assistance to Ukraine and its neighboring countries. This comes in addition to and not instead of our humanitarian assistance to crises all around the world, including in Africa, in the Middle East, and the Caribbean. The implications of this war, as the EU representative has said, go far beyond Ukraine. It has affected food security in many parts of this world, and nuclear risks are higher than ever. Austria commends the important engagement of the International Atomic Energy Agency headquartered in Vienna, and may I add personally with Rafael Grossi at its helm, to secure and monitor Ukraine's nuclear power plants. The agency's work has been crucial to avoid any nuclear accidents. Austria has consistently advocated for a comprehensive, just and lasting peace in Ukraine, a peace based on the UN Charter and international law. But peace negotiations are not credible while bombs fall. We therefore need an urgent ceasefire, one that is actually respected, monitored and implemented. We stand ready to support all genuine efforts towards peace, including by offering our good offices and hosting negotiations in Vienna, as we've done many times in the past. The UN and the OSCE, both headquartered in Vienna, can play an important role in the implementation of a ceasefire, in addition to their indispensable contributions in the humanitarian field and on human rights. We commend the efforts of Switzerland as the current chair of the OSCE in this regard and stand ready to support them as host country. Excellencies, Madam President, Ukraine deserves peace, stability and prosperity. Austria stands ready to do its part. I thank you.
I thank the permanent representative of Austria. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Estonia.
President of the General Assembly, Excellencies, for the fourth year, February 24 marks a sad and tragic day, Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, unprovoked, unjustified and brutal. For Estonia, February 24 has been a symbol of freedom as we celebrate today our 108th Independence Day. On such an important day for us, I want to recognize the courage of the Ukrainian people. Ukraine is fighting not only for its freedom, but also for the values and international law-based multilateral order that most of us hold dear. President, a permanent member of the Security Council of Russia has chosen to grossly violate the foundational principles of the UN Charter: sovereignty, territorial integrity, and the peaceful settlement of disputes. Throughout its war of aggression against Ukraine, Russia has been using the full spectrum of heavy weaponry, including armed drones and intermediate-range ballistic missiles, the so-called Oreshnik, capable of carrying nuclear weapons against Ukraine's civilian population and critical infrastructure, killing and injuring an unimaginable number of civilians, including children. Moreover, Russia has been carrying out brutal attacks against Ukraine's energy system for months, leaving millions of people every day without electricity, heating and water in the midst of the freezing temperatures. Russia is clearly trying to break the Ukrainian people. We call on all nations to deliver critical equipment, fuel supplies and other donations to help repair the energy sector of Ukraine. As Ukraine enters its fifth year of full-scale war, an estimated 10.8 million people require humanitarian assistance. To alleviate sufferings of the Ukrainian people, in addition to our everyday assistance, Estonia will host the Ukraine Recovery Conference in 2027 in Tallinn, which will bring together all partner and donor countries, the public and private sectors, as well as their civil society. President, at least 20,000 Ukrainian children have been deported from occupied territories to Russia. We recall the relevant resolution adopted by the General Assembly last year in December and demand Russia immediately and unconditionally return all Ukrainian children. Russia must be held accountable for war crimes and crimes against humanity perpetrated in Ukraine. Despite sustained efforts by Ukraine, the United States and Europe, Russia continues deliberately obscuring and obstructing any genuine progress towards peace. Therefore, all the UN member states need to come together and force Russia to peace in Ukraine. Estonia calls for the swift implementation of the resolution adopted by the General Assembly today that we proudly co-sponsored. We remain fully committed to achieving a comprehensive, just, and lasting peace in Ukraine, based on international law and in full respect of Ukraine's sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity within its internationally recognized borders. Estonia's support to Ukraine and its people remains unwavering. We will not give up, knowing very well that one day justice will prevail. I thank you.
I thank the permanent representative of Estonia and now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Portugal.
Thank you, Madam President, Excellencies, dear colleagues. 4 years on, the war in Ukraine continues. Ukrainian civilians continue to pay the highest price, and the credibility of our collective commitment to international law continues to be tested. Portugal stands firmly with Ukraine, providing financial, military, and humanitarian support. We have welcomed over 60,000 refugees, offering temporary protection, housing, and integration support. But this war doesn't just affect Ukraine or Europe. It reverberates globally, with cumulative losses that exceed multiple trillions of dollars. Energy prices increased, food costs spiked and contributed to inflation and food insecurity in many regions, particularly in developing countries. Blocked Black Sea routes and damaged ports in Ukraine significantly disrupt freight and heightening logistical costs. Global trade shrunk, affecting economic integration. Uncertainty dampened capital investment. Large refugee flows impacted labor markets in neighboring countries. This has a global impact. And Excellencies, today we were called to vote on a resolution in support for a lasting peace in Ukraine, paving the way for regional and global stability. The adopted text recalls the most fundamental principles of the UN Charter and contains 3 clear and essential demands that are the minimum conditions required to move from war towards peace, nothing more and nothing less. We are all aware that the commendable efforts to advance peace and face obstacles in the Security Council attempts to adopt meaningful outcomes have been repeatedly blocked, making the voice of the Secretary of the General Assembly all the more important. Our vote in favor of this resolution was a vote for the Charter, a vote for international law, a vote for the protection of civilians, and ultimately a vote for peace. This text does not preempt negotiations. On the contrary, it reinforces them. By clearly expressing the will of the international community, it strengthens ongoing diplomatic efforts and sends a unified message for peace. At this critical juncture, today's resolution brings much needed clarity to our path to peace, overcoming silence or ambiguity. Excellencies, the principles at stake in Ukraine are not regional, they are universal. They concern sovereignty, territorial integrity, the prohibition of the use of force, the protection of civilians, accountability under international law. They concern the very foundations of this organization. Today, we have clearly reaffirmed those foundations by overwhelmingly supporting this resolution. I thank you.
Agradeço ao representante permanente de Portugal. Obrigada.
Thank the Permanent Representative of Portugal. Thank you.
Representative of Poland.
Madam President, Excellencies, 4 years have passed since the Russian Federation launched its brutal, unjustified, and unlawful full-scale aggression against Ukraine. 4 years of immense human suffering and destruction. 4 years of flagrant violation of the principles upon which this organization stands. 4 years of threatening Europe and global security. The resolution adopted today recalls the most fundamental principles of the UN Charter that we all adhere to. It calls for a comprehensive and unconditional cessation of hostilities as a fundamental element of peace process. We are convinced that this is a first step and a sine qua non condition for achieving a just and lasting peace in Ukraine. In accordance with the UN Charter, we all subscribe to. Russia is persistent in its demands to re-establish its neo-colonial sphere of influence over the Eastern and Central Europe. Russian officials deny the Ukrainian people their right to a sovereign domestic and foreign policy. We cannot agree to that. No delegation should. Russia's invasion and ongoing occupation of parts of Ukraine constitute a grave breach of international law. Any attempted annexation or forced integration of Ukrainian territory is null and void. In the temporarily occupied territories, repression is systematic. Surveillance, coercion, and digital controls have eliminated space for dissent. Russian laws are selectively imposed to entrench domination. Ukrainian citizens are pressured to accept Russian passports. Those who refuse are threatened as foreigners in their own homes, deprived of rights and services. We are witnessing deliberate demographic and ideological re-engineering. Ukrainian children are unlawfully transferred and deported. Education is being weaponized to erase identity, and young people are drawn into paramilitary structures serving the occupying power. Such actions violate international humanitarian law, including the Fourth Geneva Convention. Reports by the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights and the Independent International Commission of Inquiry on Ukraine document arbitrary detention, enforced disappearances, torture, and extrajudicial executions. These violations form a consistent pattern. The economic potential of the occupied territories is redirected to support Russia's war effort. Religious life is also subjected to pressure. That's all for the climate of trust needed for negotiations the Russian delegation was speaking about. Madam President, many high-level delegations were unable to join us today because of the severe winter conditions for the last 2 days. If you complained about inconveniences yesterday, please think what Ukraine is facing, where temperatures are much colder and Russia systematically attacks cities, shelling power and heating plants, and leaving millions of people without electricity and heat in the dead of winter. This is yet another Russian war crime during the aggression. Maybe these days it's easier for us to grasp the cruelty of the deliberate actions. We firmly believe that impunity cannot prevail. War crimes, crimes against humanity, and the crime of aggression must not go unpunished. In the meanwhile, Moscow presents itself as an advocate for global partners, exploit the economic difficulties of people around the world by recruiting them to Russia's military forces and engaging in the neo-colonial war. From the first day of the invasion, Polish solidarity has remained steadfast and focused on Ukraine's victory, the restoration of its territorial integrity, and the protection of human life. We are convinced that Ukraine will prevail with the sustained commitment of the national community that was shown also today in the voting. Thank you so much.
I thank the permanent representative of Poland and now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Luxembourg.
Madame la Présidente.
Madam President, Luxembourg aligns itself with a statement delivered by the European Union. I will complement it with remarks in a national capacity. 4 years ago to the day, Russia launched a full-scale war of aggression against its neighbor Ukraine. Today marks the 1,462nd day of this war from another era, an unprovoked, unjustified, and unjustifiable war of aggression. Russia has not only attacked Ukraine, a sovereign member state, a founding member of our organization, but has also committed the most flagrant violation of international law and of the Charter of the United Nations. For nearly a year, Ukraine has consented to the conclusion of a ceasefire. Russia, however, refuses the ceasefire. The Russian armed forces continue to attack populations and to bombard civilian and energy infrastructure in Ukraine. 1 year ago, Russia voted in favor of Security Council Resolution 2774, which urgently called for a quote-unquote swift end to the conflict. But since then, Russia has intensified its attacks against Ukraine. The year 2025 was the deadliest for Ukrainian civilians since 2022. Our thoughts today are with the millions of Ukrainians who have been subjected to unspeakable suffering, as well as with the tens of thousands who have been killed over the past 4 years. At this critical juncture, it is essential for the General Assembly to lend its full support to a lasting peace in Ukraine. That is the purpose of the resolution submitted by Ukraine, which we adopted this morning. Luxembourg is proud to have co-sponsored and voted in favor of this resolution, which sets out 3 very clear demands. First, an immediate, full, and unconditional ceasefire. Second, a comprehensive, just, and lasting peace in line with international law, including the Charter of the United Nations. And thirdly, the complete exchange of prisoners of war, the release of all unlawfully detained persons, and the return of all internees and of civilians forcibly transferred or deported, including children, as a significant confidence-building measure. We thank the member states from all regions that voted in favor of this resolution. This vote is a vote for peace, a vote for the Charter and its principles. The war of aggression waged by Russia against Ukraine is taking place on the European continent, but we all know that the consequences of this war are felt far beyond Europe. This war spreads death and suffering in Ukraine, but it also undermines global stability, disrupts food and energy supply chains, contributes to higher inflation worldwide, and undermines trust in international institutions and norms. Madam President, efforts to end this war through diplomacy and dialogue deserve our full support. We have closely followed the talks held between the Ukrainian and Russian delegations with the participation of the United States, which were held in Abu Dhabi and Geneva. A peace agreement can only be durable if it is just, accepted by the Ukrainians, and backed by robust security guarantees. And because it concerns European security, Europeans will need to be involved. And any agreement must be based on the principles of the UN Charter, as this Assembly has stated. Peace will be just when the perpetrators of the gravest crimes committed on Ukrainian soil are held accountable and when justice is done for the victims. In this context, Luxembourg supports the work of Ukrainian judicial authorities and of the International Criminal Court, which has already issued several arrest warrants against Russian officials. We support the establishment of a special tribunal for the crime of aggression against Ukraine. Madam President, Ukraine can continue to count on Luxembourg's full support and solidarity in its heroic struggle to defend its freedom and universal values. Through its engagement across all domains, from humanitarian and energy assistance to military support, Luxembourg supports Ukraine's independence, unity, sovereignty, and territorial integrity within its internationally recognized borders. We will continue to work towards a comprehensive, just, and lasting peace in Ukraine, a peace in accordance with international law. We will continue to stand up for the respect of the UN Charter, which is our shared bulwark against those who seek to impose the law of the strongest over the rule of law. Thank you very much.
Je remercie.
I thank the permanent representative of Luxembourg.
I'll give the floor to the distinguished representative of Liechtenstein.
For the floor, Madam President. Today we commemorate the anniversary of Russia's aggression against Ukraine, which began in February 2014 with the invasion of eastern Ukraine and the illegal annexation of Crimea. Russia's full-scale aggression is unequivocally in violation of Article 2.4 of the Charter. Over the past year, Russia has continued to expand the catalogue of war crimes and crimes against humanity in support of its aggression, which is at the origin of all the other crimes. Russia's attacks on critical infrastructure over the past weeks are clearly timed to weaponize the dead of winter and terrorize the civilian population of Ukraine. Madam President, the situation today demonstrates the insufficiency of our response in 2014, which did not even specify that Russia had committed aggression against Ukraine, far from condemning it. This limited response, far from preventing subsequent aggression, was de facto a contributing factor to Russia's full-scale invasion 4 years ago. We must acknowledge the shortcomings of our collective action and recognize the need to respond to future violations with greater resolve from the outset. Madam President, in 2022, the Council delegated its primary responsibility for the situation in Ukraine to the General Assembly. The 2 vetoes exercised by the Russian Federation on amendments to last year's Security Council resolution, eventually adopted as Resolution 2774, disregarded the membership's expressed and recorded political will, as had previously been expressed in the General Assembly. As Russia is a party to a dispute in the case of Ukraine, its vetoes of resolutions and amendments on texts addressing its aggression against Ukraine are clear violations of Article 27.3 of the UN Charter in addition. The resolutions adopted by this Assembly since 2022 demonstrate a robust and principled approach which must be the basis for any meaningful initiative for peace in Ukraine. The implementation of these resolutions is key in order to bring an end to a war that has caused immense suffering to the civilian population, to ensure accountability under international law, including the crime of aggression, and to bring justice for all victims and survivors. As for today's text, Liechtenstein has co-sponsored the resolution and was pleased to see it adopted. It is indeed time for the international community to voice its support for a ceasefire which Ukraine has been offering for a long time now. We would have preferred, of course, to have seen the title refer to a just and lasting peace, as we would have wanted to see a reference to the ongoing aggression against the Ukrainian people, and given the slaughter of Russian combatants, also their own. We are pleased, nevertheless, to see the strong support for international law and the Charter in support of a just and lasting peace in paragraph 2, which includes principles of sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity. International law must be at the forefront of our framework for peace. Madam President, as a matter of the implementation of today's resolution, we reiterate that initiatives for peace must include all the relevant parties. In this respect, we note that Ukraine, the victim state, has engaged for some time in negotiation with the intention of making the difficult compromises necessary for a just, lasting, and comprehensive peace. They have been met by interlocutors from the Russian Federation who appear to wish only to extend the war on their own terms. The ongoing attacks by the Russian Federation against Ukraine and targeting civilians during talks only serve to illustrate this lack of good faith. Liechtenstein reiterates that a ceasefire now is a matter of priority. Madam President, those engaged in the execution of a peace agreement must first ensure a just and lasting peace for Ukraine, but they must also be aware that peace for Ukraine is necessary for peace in Europe as a whole. If we are to settle for anything short of the law as embodied in the Charter, we risk making the same mistake we did 12 years ago, one which the people of Ukraine, of Europe, and across the world will be ill-equipped to bear the consequences. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Liechtenstein and now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Belgium.
Madam President, dear colleagues, Belgium fully supports the statement of the European Union. I would like to mention three things in my national capacity. Firstly, nothing can justify the Russian aggression against Ukraine, which began more than 10 years ago and has continued on a large scale since the 24th of February 2022. Ukraine is a sovereign state whose borders cannot be changed by force. The Charter is clear. The aims of the United Nations are clear, namely to maintain international peace and security by taking effective collective measures in order to prevent and remove threats to peace and to suppress any act of aggression. This aggression cannot benefit the aggressor, Russia. 2. Belgium supports all initiatives that lead to a comprehensive, just and lasting peace based on the principles of the Charter and on international law. Belgium therefore regrets that the Security Council has not been able to call for a complete, unconditional and immediate ceasefire in Ukraine at the very least, as it has done in a large majority of current conflicts. This Ukrainian exception must be corrected. Belgium also calls on Russia to act in good faith. It must implement Security Council Resolution 2774. It must apply all the resolutions adopted by this Assembly since the beginning of its war of choice. 3. Russia today has called for constraint with regard to the negotiations. However, Russia is attacking civilians and civilian infrastructure every day and does this deliberately, without any regret. In 2025, the number of civilian victims shot up, and they are violating international law every day. We need long-standing solution, but the facts are contradicting the Russian narrative. Dear colleagues, we would like to thank all members that have supported the cause of peace by voting in favour of the resolution presented today, a resolution that is fully anchored in the Charter of the United Nations and its principles. Thank you. I thank the Permanent Representative of Belgium.
The floor to the distinguished representative of Ireland.
Madam President, today we gather in this chamber on a sombre occasion to mark 4 years since Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine, an act of unprovoked and unjustified aggression against a peaceful neighbour. Over the past 4 years, millions of Ukrainians have been forced to flee their homes. Thousands have been killed, and thousands more, including children, have been kidnapped, tortured, or arbitrarily imprisoned by Russian forces. In the face of such brutal adversity, Ukrainians continue to demonstrate outstanding courage, resolve, and determination. Madam President, for 4 years, we, the representatives of the governments of the world, have stood in this chamber and asked for something quite simple and yet fundamental: that the UN Charter be respected and that the innocent civilians of Ukraine be left to live their lives without the fear of constant violence. We have not demanded the earth, but the bare minimum. Russia should simply stop the killing and return to its international obligations, respecting the sovereignty and the territorial integrity of other states and its solemn commitments in the Budapest Memorandum. And for 4 long years we have been ignored. Ignored not just as individual states, but as the General Assembly of the United Nations. This Assembly has adopted no fewer than 8 resolutions within this emergency special session to date, and again one more today, all seeking a just and sustainable end to this illegal war in line with international law. I sincerely regret that we've been forced to consider this issue again today, not because we want to, but simply because Russia refuses to comply with the will of these United Nations. We also watch with horror as Russia disregards the principles of international humanitarian law, torn up with each nightly impact of hundreds of drones and missile attacks, brutally killing innocent civilians across Ukrainian cities, and intentionally freezing thousands more in the frigid winter months. Madam President, the UN has faced strong criticism of late, that it is ineffective, inefficient, ill-suited to a time some see as a moment of global rupture. But we would do well to recall that we are all the United Nations. This body reflects our efforts, our initiatives, and yes, our failures. I ask all of you to consider the damage Russia is doing to the UN's credibility by simply ignoring the will of this assembly for this long, falsely claiming it wants peace, while pursuing more territory, more debt, and more weaponry for imperial conquest. Russia has now attacked Ukraine night after night, day after day, for longer than a fort in the Second World War. A grim milestone and an anniversary none of us wanted to reach. Ukraine's suffering, no less than that of the appalling tragedy meted out to the Palestinian people, has shown for those who pursue the barbarism of might makes right, the UN does not bring sufficient accountability. Colleagues, it is within our power as the member states of the UN to change that, and we must do so with the tools we've all built together since the end of World War II. We must demonstrate that those tools work and that the UN works. Revitalisation and transformation of the UN is not just about cost-cutting and bureaucratic reform. It is most importantly about the political will to demonstrate that we mean what we say, that we follow through on our principles, and that when the gavel comes down at this podium, it changes facts on the ground in the real world. And that is up to us as member states. And for this unjust and appalling war, that means that we all must step up and support Ukraine, support its lawful right to defend itself, to restore its energy grid, and to bolster its resolve in peace negotiations. We must all demand an end to imperialism wherever it occurs, and condemn its recent human toll in Eastern Europe and everywhere else it occurs. And we must raise the cost for Russia, for its dismantling of the architecture of multilateralism, which it once had a central role in constructing and upholding. I commend all those who have worked to this end in recent months, including President Trump and the US, in their efforts towards peace. But what 80 years of the UN has taught us is that no country, no matter how powerful, can do everything alone. Today, with the adoption of this 9th resolution of the ESS, I call on all of us to do more to change those facts on the ground, to ensure that the immediate and unconditional ceasefire demanded by this General Assembly happens as soon as possible. I thank you.
I thank the permanent representative of Ireland and now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Finland.
Madam President, Finland aligns itself with the statements by the European Union and Denmark on behalf of the Nordic countries. Today, the 5th year of war is beginning since the Russian Federation launched its full-scale invasion in Ukraine. Peace efforts have been ongoing since last year. We thank the United States and other member states for their hard work. This winter has been devastating in Ukraine. By its acts, Russia has shown no genuine interest in peace. It has scaled up massive missile and drone strikes against Ukrainian civilians and civilian infrastructure. It has destroyed energy, heating, water, and transport infrastructure, targeting civilians in cold winter temperatures. Dear colleagues, imagine losing your heating and electricity in New York City during these cold and snowy weeks. The Russian attacks have left millions of Ukrainians without electricity, heating, or water in freezing temperatures, even if international humanitarian law explicitly prohibits targeting civilians and civilian infrastructure. Madam President, Ukraine is defending its sovereignty and territorial integrity enshrined in the UN Charter. The General Assembly has repeatedly sent a clear message. Russia's war of aggression violates the UN Charter. It is a clear violation of Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity, and it cannot be allowed to stand. By supporting Ukraine, we also defend multilateral world order, which is based on the UN Charter and international law. We cannot let grave violations stand without consequences, not in Ukraine, nor anywhere else in the world. Again, in the General Assembly, UN member states have had to decide what kind of a world they do want to live for future generations. One where wars rage and territorial grabs prevail, or one where disagreements are solved through negotiations, laws are respected, and accountability prevails. Madam President, the General Assembly has again stood at the crossroad, and it has called for a ceasefire and just and lasting peace instead of being indifferent towards a full-scale invasion and grave violations of the Charter. Ukraine has demonstrated its commitment to peace. Despite ongoing brutal attacks, Ukraine has engaged constructively in internationally supported peace talks, and it has repeatedly called for a ceasefire. We urge Russian Federation to do the same, to show willingness not only to negotiate, but also to proceed to peace and stop chasing its illegal dreams. If not for the rest of the world, at least for the sake of Russian people. As outlined in today's resolution, there needs to be an immediate, full and unconditional ceasefire and a comprehensive, just and lasting peace in line with the UN Charter and international law. Madam President, Finland will continue to support Ukraine and its brave people under military attack for as long as it takes. I thank you.
I thank the permanent representative of Finland and now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Germany.
Madam President, Germany aligns itself with the statement that was delivered by the European Union. 4 years ago, Russia began its full-scale invasion of Ukraine following more than 10 years of violent interferences. And every single day, Russia's illegal and unjustified war of aggression continues to cost many lives, continues to destroy livelihoods, and to inflict unjustifiable harm, and to impact food security worldwide. This year again, in the middle of a harsh winter, Russia deliberately escalated and intensified its war against the civilian population. Merciless attacks on energy infrastructure in Ukraine have left hundreds of thousands of civilians, men and women, children and elderly, without electricity, heat and water, in an attempt to break the will of Ukraine's population. We should all acknowledge and commend the enduring resilience of the Ukrainian people. All of this is well documented, including by the UN Human Rights Monitoring Mission in Ukraine. Here at the UN, Russia has consistently blocked the Security Council from taking meaningful action. And in the negotiations, Russia keeps insisting on maximalist demands and aims to gain at the negotiating table what it has failed to reach militarily. Colleagues, all of this matters to all of us, because Russia's violation of the prohibition of the use of force is an attack on the most fundamental rule, one of the most fundamental rules of the international order. Its direct attacks against the civilian population seriously undermine international humanitarian law. It has to end, and we have to be concerned, all of us. With the resolution we adopted today, the General Assembly calls for an immediate ceasefire, and this would benefit the ongoing peace negotiations It would create a basis for restarting, rebuilding trust between the parties. Let us not forget, almost a year ago, Ukraine put an offer for an immediate ceasefire without preconditions on the table. So it depends only on Russia to stop the war. Germany continues to support Ukraine's independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity with its internationally recognized borders, and together with our partners, we provide extensive political, military, financial, economic, humanitarian, and diplomatic support to Ukraine and its people, and we will continue to do so. Madam President, colleagues, it was high time that the General Assembly sent a clear message to the world today by adopting this resolution, a signal that the United Nations Charter matters, that international law matters, and that we are united in the ambition to bring this war to an end, to stop bloodshed, and to undertake serious steps towards a comprehensive, just, and lasting peace. We owe it to the Ukrainian people, who have shown time and again that they want peace, and we owe it also to our own people to show that the principles that we all agreed to matter. So, again, it depends on Russia to finally end this war. Let's all work towards this end. Thank you very much.
I thank the permanent representative of Germany. We have heard the last speaker in the debate of this item for this meeting. We shall hear the remaining speakers this afternoon at 3 p.m. in this very same hall. The meeting is adjourned.
Thank you, Madam President.
You're welcome.